for Analysis at the Department of Homeland Security. Welcome, Dawn.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me.
Indeed. We're just delighted whenever we can get a senior from the Department of Homeland Security to come out and talk to our practitioners. And as you know, our classes are filled with the entire first responder spectrum. We have law enforcement, we have fire, we have members of our military, and we have public health. And we're delighted to have you here. Today we'll be talking about threats to the homeland.
All right, thank you. And just to make clear as well, it's mutually beneficial for us to be involved in these programs because these are the various customers and partners that we need to serve. So for us to have an opportunity, and for me to have the opportunity to hear their concerns, for them to share their information, their insights on what's going on the ground across the United States in all of their discipline areas is incredibly useful for us so that we can better support their efforts. They have better synergy of effort overall.
What's interesting, Dawn, is generally speaking, people think the first responder community is police and fire. Yet we have members of our military and public health. So could you talk about public health's role in analysis and outreach from the Department of Homeland Security?
Certainly. I think one of the points that I've been trying to make is that in countering terrorist threats to the homeland, it really calls for a whole-of-nation approach. And public health has a vital role to play in this as well. So it's up to us to make sure that we share information widely with public health, to be on the lookout for the kind of chemical, biological, radiological, nuclear types of threats that terrorist groups may pose to the United States, because they are in a position where they may be the first to recognize that an attack has in fact happened. For example, a biological type of attack. So they need to be situationally aware, and in fact they may be the first ones to actually report an instance that we would then need to respond to. So we have to work together to share information with one another and make sure that they're positioned to be able to respond appropriately.
Makes perfect sense. Can you talk for a moment about the types of products Analysis puts out to that first responder community, and moreover, how members of the first responder community access that reporting?
Okay, very good. One of the challenges we have, but it's a good challenge, is the fact that the Office of Intelligence and Analysis at DHS, we're full members of the intelligence community. So we get an awful lot of highly classified intelligence, but it is our job to make sure that we can appropriately share that with state and local law enforcement, with the first responder community, the public health sector, and the like. So we work very hard to make sure we get information that we can share, that it would be actionable for them. I think one of the key things that we can do is to make sure that people understand what to be on the lookout for. You know, a lot of people talk about suspicious activities. Well, what is that? So we work hard through case studies, looking at examples of how terrorist actors and groups have operated at home and abroad. And then we try to make clear, what have we learned from that? What are the patterns of behavior that can be manifested? What are the indicators for pre-operational activity? To let people know more what to be on the lookout for, to detect, to report, and to deter terrorist actors. So some of the things that we've done in this regard to be able to share information broadly, especially for the official use only category, which is not classified, but it is still controlled, to share that is what we call roll call release products, very user-friendly. For example, typically 1 page in length with appropriate graphics and pictures and that type of thing. And literally they're meant for roll calls. When you marshal people together in the morning to get ready for work, it's a good training tool. Again, what to be on the lookout for, precursor chemicals, IEDs, any type of kind of plotting that we have seen overseas, and how you might want to be on the lookout for that here in the United States. So we've done that. A lot of reference aids too for terrorist groups and the way they act, the kind of tactics that they use. Again, meant to be user-friendly, to be able to boil down sometimes highly classified intelligence into very usable formats. Pictures, graphics, indicator charts, and the like. And we found through a lot of feedback that we've received through the first responder community and state and local law enforcement that indeed this is exactly the kind of information that they need so that they can play their part.
So we hear all the time is we need information, it needs to be actionable, it needs to be timely, and we need to have it in a format that we can use. So it's really refreshing to say, DHS heard that message. How do you hear feedback when you put these products out? Do you have a mechanism in which the first responder community can say, you hit the mark here, we need more of, less of, or gee, you missed the mark, we need a different kind of product?
Yes, in fact, I think I can state with some confidence that INA has probably one of the most aggressive customer feedback programs in the entire intelligence community. So every product that we disseminate comes out with a customer feedback survey. It was carefully designed to be user-friendly, so it's not onerous in terms of filling it out. And it is a way in which we measure and we actually track the metrics month by month, looking at the relevancy and the timeliness, the usefulness of the products that we're putting out. But we also pay special attention to the free-form text replies that we get. We send these out broadly, and we get a lot of information back. We've actually been very pleased with the amount of feedback that we've received, because I know there's survey fatigue that's out there. And that really has not played out for us. We're pleased that we continue to get the amount of feedback that we receive. We pay a lot of attention to it. So, for example, we're trying to serve 5 key customer sets: the DHS leadership, the components of DHS, state and local authorities. We're trying to serve the private sector and the intelligence community. It's difficult to serve that many customers at varying levels of classification. So feedback from our customers is absolutely important to us, critical even, so that we can better tailor our products to their needs. So we take a close look at that, and we try to be flexible. So we try to adjust our approach as need be based on the kind of feedback that we receive. So we've put together groups of people who actively look through all that free-form text replies and come up with good practical solutions on how we can do better and how we can serve our customer sets. So I really encourage our customers to give us that kind of feedback so we can serve them better.
Thank you. That was a great summation, and a challenge indeed to meet that diverse customer set with a product that's usable. You said something else that sparked my interest, and that is outreach to the private sector. So you have that first responder community, and I think everybody understands first responder community, Department of Homeland Security. I don't think it's as immediately obvious the critical role that the private sector plays in Homeland Security. Could you speak about that for a moment?
Well, the economy of the United States is largely in the hands of the private sector, and they need to be action-oriented. They have to be our eyes and ears on the ground, and we need to do everything that we can so that they're best positioned to be able to protect assets around the country. DHS has a special statutory role to play in terms of providing support for protection of critical industries and key resources, the CIKR. But at the same time, we reach out very broadly to corporate America and the various sector coordinating councils for the private sector to make sure that we're sharing information with them on terrorist threats, on the evolving nature of their tactics, so that they're in the best position possible to know how they can gear their protective measures to support the protection of these vital assets around the United States. We do this in concert with the Office of Infrastructure Protection at DHS, and also in close collaboration with the Federal Bureau of Investigation.
Very good. I know it's difficult to just generalize about threats, but let's try to do that. The threats you see on the horizon that directly impact the homeland, and then if you would comment on major events we have upcoming. We have a number of students involved in this cohort. They're actively involved in planning for the conventions that are upcoming this summer.
Right. Well, briefly, we face a very diverse and certainly evolving terrorist threat environment here in the United States. And the direct aftermath of 9/11, our primary concern was core al-Qaeda and the threat it posed, positioned primarily from the AfPak region. But the nature of the threat has certainly become much more diversified and complex over time. So what we've seen is al-Qaeda's ideology has certainly been adopted by any number of regional groups around the world who have increasingly taken on the mantra of with an anti-Western focus. So groups such as Al-Qaeda in Iraq, such as Al-Shabaab, such as Al-Qaeda in the Arabian Peninsula, who earlier had focused their activities within their own regions of the world, increasingly are showing the intent and the capability to operate outside of their traditional AORs. And we're in their gun sights, I mean literally. And so some of these groups of late have really tried to improve their capability to attack our interest, to include in the United States. So that is something that we have closely followed and tried to share broadly with state and local law enforcement and first responders around the United States, especially focused on their tactics in terms of how they would carry out attacks against our interest. At the same time, it's not just the organized groups, it's the individuals who adhere to their ideology. So that's where the whole phenomena of homegrown violent extremism comes into play. And certainly over the past few years, we in FBI have been tracking a number of recent cases of individuals not closely aligned with specific terrorist groups, but still motivated to carry out acts of violence. And that's where really this whole of nation approach comes in, because it's vitally important that we have people in the field know what to be on the lookout for, what to report, and how to deter their actions. In addition to the threat posed by international terrorists, for decades, of course, in this country, we've been faced with domestic terrorist groups who are not driven by a foreign ideology, but by any number of agendas. So we and FBI, and I will make clear FBI does have the lead on this topic, we do cover these because of the threat that they pose, whether it is animal rights activists or environmental activists who have actually worked on the fringes to carry out acts of violence. The white supremacist movement, the sovereign citizens, I mean the list goes on and on. Again, we may not agree with their agendas and their ideology. Much of the activity that they undertake is protected under the First Amendment. We are concerned about their criminal behavior, but most importantly for DHS, where they try to mobilize to carry out acts of violence. This is of concern to state and local law enforcement, and it's certainly of concern to corporate America as well. So, again, we have kind of a persistent drumbeat of these threats, relatively low level, but certainly we're not dismissive of it. You mentioned some of the upcoming events, and certainly when we look at the Republican and the Democratic National Conventions, as well as the G8 and other types of gatherings, what we have found in the past is a history of individuals and groups that have aligned with kind of the anarchist movement who have come in to protest these conferences and these convening of officials to protest, but at the same time we've seen black bloc tactics played out where individuals and small groups will try to mobilize some of these crowds to violence. Typically this is played out in terms of vandalism and acts of destruction and some violence directed against law enforcement officials in particular who were there to kind of protect the key sites where the events are taking place. So I will tell you that this is of great concern, especially at the local level when we look at Charlotte and Tampa coming up this summer, and Chicago with a number of international events that they are hosting this spring and summer as well. So again, we share information with them. FBI does as well, and try to make sure that they are as situationally aware as they can. Again, our focus is on the acts of violence, not on the actual protest movements. But it will be the area of focus for many of us in our community in the coming months.
Dawn, thank you. You've spoken about a partnership with the FBI and a very necessary partnership. How about other agencies across the community, Defense Intelligence Agency or others?
Right. Let me hit at least a few of those. And you mentioned DIA, the Defense Intelligence Agency. And certainly we are very concerned about the threat to U.S. military personnel and facilities in the United States. This has really been evident with some of the plots that have been disrupted from homegrown violent extremists. Many of these individuals are concerned with U.S. foreign policy and the war efforts previously in Iraq and currently in Afghanistan. And so where they want to take out retribution is typically against U.S. military type targets. So in this sense, it's not just the hardened targets of the military posts and bases across the United States, but also kind of the softer targets, if you will. Military recruitment centers, which by design are in locations that are very publicly accessible, as well as even restaurants where military personnel may frequent. So that's where a close alignment of DHS and FBI and military officials really comes into play to make sure that we have a common understanding of the threat and make sure that we have good coordination of effort across the communities, both military and civilian. Likewise, we work with every element of the intelligence community and elements of DHS, the various component operating agencies of DHS. It really is a coordinated effort. We are trying increasingly to find good synergies of effort across the scope of our authorities and responsibilities and the kind of data that we have access to.
Very good. And two final questions. The first is, everyone's concerned, you heard that in the class today, about drawn down budgets and losing access to funding and other kinds of things. Those budget impacts have to impact your ability to do the jobs that you do.
Right.
You're thinking about that?
Absolutely.
Threat is increasing, budget is decreasing. Where is the middle ground?
I think the middle ground is that we need to be closely attuned to the key needs of our customer base and our partnerships. I'd mentioned earlier that INA has been focused on kind of key threat areas and security challenges to the United States, not just terrorism, but in the areas of border security and cybersecurity as well. We won't be able to do as much perhaps as we had done in the past, but we need to continue to do very impactful work. So the trick for us is to be as attuned as we possibly can be with our partners to find out what most do they need, and also to find good partnerships across the state and local lines with the DHS components and with the IC to make sure we have a good shared effort. And so we all can't do everything, but what we can do is try to work in a coordinated fashion with good information sharing and sharing of responsibilities. So that's where, again, the feedback from our customers is going to be vitally important to make sure that with the resources we do have, we're using them to best effect.
Thank you. A comment and a final question, and the comment is any criticism that has been levied in the past is big Department of Homeland Security doesn't listen to the needs and requirements of the first responder community. You've certainly dispelled that myth. So the final question, 29-year tough veteran of the community, what keeps you awake at night?
What keeps me awake is that despite all of the efforts that we've made to improve our collection of intelligence and our sharing of intelligence on terrorist threats, that we could still be taken by surprise. And so I do worry that we may miss something along the way. I do worry that there could be another large-scale attack on the United States. Do I see that reflected in current reporting right now? Of course not. But we still are concerned about what we don't know. And it's the unknowns really that keep us up at night. So it really encourages us every day to make sure we're doing everything possible to get the information that we need, and just as importantly to make sure we're sharing it as broadly as we can with the people who can make a difference on the ground.
Dawn, thank you very much for spending your time. This is a multidisciplinary course, as you know, and to be able to interact with members of the first responder community has been invaluable to them, and I hope an important opportunity for DHS as well.
Thank you. I know I've learned a lot. It's a wonderful opportunity to meet people representing so many disciplines across the United States. So I greatly appreciate the opportunity.
Very good. Thank you.